others who you know able to join. So for the deal, we'll get started. So hello everyone, welcome to our virtual resume workshop. We're so thrilled to have you here. As I mentioned before, my name is John Dorsley. I'm the Director of Marketing and Engagement at United Way of Greater Toledo, and I'm so delighted to be able to host this event on behalf of AALC and on behalf of the African American Leadership Council in partnership with Pathway Inc. and the Community Reinvestment Coalition Englewood Southwest. Today, obviously, we're here to help you polish your resume, hence your job search skills. Whether you're just starting or looking to make a career change, you'll find this workshop very valuable. Before we get started, I really wanted to allow Tamika Rushing from Pathway Inc. just to say a few words about today and just the other things that she's doing to help job seekers in our community.
Phenomenal, John and Shayna. Thank you so much for partnering with Pathway on this phenomenal opportunity to engage job seekers, like you said, that's starting out and looking to increase their employability and their income. And one of the main challenges most often when job seekers are trying to secure employment is making sure that they have a credible resume that markets themselves, because that's the first piece of information that an employer sees before they actually offer an interview. So kudos to you all for your partnership. Thank you, LLC, United Way, and all the rest of our partners that have chose to come forth and offer your time and your patience and give this great professional opportunity to the people abroad. I'm Tamika Rushing, formerly the Director of Employment and Career Services and the Financial Opportunity here at Pathway. And that leads the segue into Shayna.
Thank you so much. Before I introduce Shayna, just a few housekeeping things. So please, obviously, while Shayna is presenting, try to keep yourselves on mute just so everyone is able to hear clearly what she's sharing. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to pop them in the chat. And I'm sure either we'll take breaks in between to answer them, or we'll kind of do it all at the end, all towards the end. And then also for those who may want to utilize captioning, I believe there should be a button near the bottom of your screen where you can turn on captioning, just so you could also follow along that way as well, just in case you have any difficulties hearing. But without further ado, let me introduce Miss Shayna Duke. So Shayna Duke is a human resources professional with nearly 14 years of experience in manufacturing environments. She is passionate about collaborating with others and creating diverse workplaces where people thrive. Shayna has extensive experience in developing and managing all aspects of an organization's quality and business improvement efforts. Her expertise includes organizational development, labor relations, creating high-performing teams, and improving training system and processes. Shayna worked for the Campbell Soup Company, where she established a human resources training department that brought new roles and structured training programs to the organization. She has also worked as a champion of change, implemented employee resource groups in her current role as a human resources business partner at Principal Business Enterprises. Shayna Duke was born and raised in Bowling Green, Ohio, a Forever Falcon. Shayna holds an undergraduate degree in communications and a master's degree in organizational development from Bowling Green State University. Her education has fueled her passion to develop others and help them become the best version of themselves. Outside of work, Shayna sits on the board of directors for Women of Toledo, a nonprofit organization advocating for diversity and inclusion with a focus on women's economic empowerment. She has recently been consulting on change management, learning and development, and integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies into the workplace. She loves traveling with her husband, Jonathan, baking, crafting, and spending time with her son, Chase. Please join me in welcoming Shayna Duke.
Hello, thank you for the introduction, and it's a pleasure truly to be here with you this afternoon. So thank you for having me. We've got a lot of great content for you today, and as Jonathan mentioned, we'll have some time for questions, but I want to preface the conversation with I am here to help following today, so I'll make sure that you have my contact information as well as the slides that we're going to be shared so that you can reference this material at any time that you need it. So thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us, and I hope that you get a lot of great insight from our discussion today. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. You let me know when we're in business.
All good. Let me see your screen.
Okay, great. Am I sharing the right screen? Do you see my slide? Does it say agenda or does it say that just the first slide?
That's the first slide.
Okay, beautiful. All right, want to make sure we're good to go. All righty, so today I'm going to go over the agenda here for us. We're going to talk a little bit about the purpose of why you have a resume, right, and why it's important to create one, the benefits. We're going to go a little bit into cover letters, when to use one, what that looks like. We'll talk about the layout, so what do you want to include in your resume, because as mentioned, this is really a way to brand yourself, market yourself, make you stand out from others. So what are some things that you can do to set yourself apart from the rest? We'll talk through the structure, so how to actually craft your resume. And then we'll go through some tips and some tools and resources. We live in a very technology heavy and driven society now. And of course, there are a ton of things out there. So how do you use those? What are some of the better ones, and how can those be used in the right way? I do want to touch on AI because that is kind of all the talk right now. And it's a great tool when, again, used in the right space, in the right sense. So we'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of how to navigate that. And then we'll just wrap up with some takeaways. So as Jonathan mentioned, go ahead and pop questions in the chat. I'm happy to pause and give you some time at the end. I also want to preface it with saying these slides are kind of content heavy, but that was crafted by design to make sure that you did have some great information to reference later. Okay, so our purpose of resumes, right? So really this is your first impression without getting to see your potential future employer, right? So it helps demonstrate why you're a good fit for an open position. This really helps map where you've been, tell your career story, your career journey, and why you are the right fit for this particular role. It makes you stand out, right? So really how you frame your career accomplishments, volunteer activities, maybe you are part of a team, whatever it is that you've done, and you're showcasing your skill sets that are going to set you apart from the rest and really highlight who you are for a future employer. And then of course, the end goal, right, is to help you land an interview. So this is, it's really important that you want to showcase and make sure that your content and how you're selling yourself is on par with what you're trying to do, so you can get that interview and really have that be the gateway to getting a job in the future. So the benefits of having this nice visual written representation of who you are, it gives you that edge over other candidates. It helps you leave that lasting impression, right? So what is going to make you stand out from others, as well as being memorable, right? And then also showcasing your strengths and your achievements. So we'll talk a little bit about this in a few slides, but it can be hard sometimes to kind of toot your own horn and talk about yourself in that light. But this is really all about all the positive, wonderful things that you've done and how do you highlight those. And then hopefully this will in turn open your door to more and more career opportunities as you are kind of figuring out where you want to grow in life. And so cover letters, you don't always need a cover letter. And in fact, as an HR professional, I'll be very candid in saying I don't, depending on the type or the level of role, I don't really prefer a cover letter. It's just one more thing to read. But sometimes, depending on what you're applying for, especially if you're applying on an online, using an online tool, they might have you upload a cover letter, or they may say that it's optional. So there's a few times where you might want to do this, right? So if the listing is asking for one, absolutely make sure you have a cover letter. If you are interested in the role, or if you're particularly interested in the role and you want to highlight why you would be a great fit, this is just a short paragraph to kind of give them that first impression, and then until you get into the meat of your resume. If you've got more to say, or you're changing careers, you're looking for advancement, or maybe your resume might have a gap, that might be another reason why you would want a cover letter as well. So this is, again, not always a necessity. I would say more times than not, you don't need one. But if it is asking you for one because it requires it or is optional, I would make sure that you have something. And it's just a very short snippet, a summary of highlight, to kind of giving them a sneak peek at what they can expect from you in your resume. So now let's get into kind of the meat of what you should include in a resume, right? So of course, any education, we'll talk further about this, but even if you have not completed, say you're working towards a college degree or you're working on your high school GED, whatever that looks like, you still want to include it, even if you haven't graduated yet. Your contact information, so critical, and you got to make sure it's updated and correct. Any leadership experience that you have, of course, any experience that you have that pertains to the role, a resume summary or objective, and that's just really, we'll talk a little bit about what that is, but that's kind of the first part of your resume. Hobbies, awards, an introduction to who you are, and of course, any accomplishments or achievements that you have, you want to highlight those. So we're going to go through these 10 steps one by one, but here's kind of the structure of what it looks like to write a resume, or how do you even get started to tackle this information. So let's start with gathering relevant information, right? So you want to put, this is where, again, it's your time to shine, measurable accomplishments from your previous positions that really highlight your contributions to a certain role. We love, as HR professionals, specifics or results. So, you might have achieved something, or you might have got a team over the hump to get to this particular goal. So anytime you can be specific or really highlight something that you did that was really great, or what your role in that was, that's something you definitely want to highlight. You also want to put maybe a list or some bullet points of technical skills or any kind of skill sets that match the job that you are applying for. So I typically always look at, and we'll talk a little bit about looking at the job summary or the job description ahead of time, but that's a great place to start, because they'll tell you what the requirements or what the qualifications are they're looking for, and that will help drive you to make sure you're highlighting those in your resume. Of course, detailed information about your previous employers. We do like to see dates, so that just shows us consistent employment. It's okay if you have some gaps, and we'll talk about how do you showcase those, but it's really important to have any previous work experience and what you did there as part of your resume. That's kind of the meat and potatoes of the resume. Any educational credentials, so your college degree, maybe you have certain certifications or licenses that really demonstrate your expertise in specific areas, so you want to make sure you include that. Volunteer work can be a really great thing to add, especially if you are just starting out, or you're young in career. This might be and you don't have a lot of work experience, but you do a lot of volunteerism, you help out your community. Those are wonderful things and still give you a sense of experience to highlight on your resume. And then, of course, any awards or honors that you might have received, or any type of accolades that, again, might help really apply to the job at hand. You want to make sure you're highlighting those as well. All right, so we're going to talk about, there's a few formats. You don't have to get hung up on the type of format, but I just want to give you some visual examples of how you might actually structure the layout of your resume, just so it has a nice flow and everything's categorized in a nice, clean way. So there's 3 standard formats, and they all really have very similar sections. It just organizes them differently, so it's nice and friendly to the human eye and the reader. So there's a chronological resume format, functional, and a combination resume format. So let's first take a look at chronological. And you'll see an example here. This is really works nicely for applicants or candidates that are trying to highlight their work experience, because they have consistent backgrounds and not a lot of employment gaps. So you'll have your contact information name, that's pretty standard up front. You'll see that example of a resume summary. So that's kind of that overriding arching statement that you'll lead with. And then they'll get into their professional history, educational, and then skills and abilities at the bottom. So this is something that kind of goes in order from a flow perspective of what they've achieved from their professional work history. The next is a functional resume format, and this really helps showcasing your skills and training, right? So this might be something that those with any employment gaps or maybe limited work experience would go towards this type of layout. So again, you'll see that name, contact summary, that's standard at the beginning, and then you'll see we go into skills group by theme. So, you know, they did some complaint resolution. They've got skills process streamlining. So highlighting those skills and then putting some of the experience and their education towards the bottom. And any of these formats or a combination, which is the last one of the two, are absolutely fine and acceptable when applying for a job. So this really kind of is exactly that, right? It's a combination of both the chronological and the functional. So this might be a great choice for job seekers that have more than 10 years of experience and they're trying to move up in their career, or they've been with the same company for some time. And you can kind of do this hybrid of listing your skills out at the beginning and then putting that professional experience following by education, awards, etc. So any of these work, you see kind of what feels right for you based on where you're at in your career and based on what experience, skill set, and professional work history that you have to bring to the table. So we talked a little bit about the importance of adding your contact information, right? So you really want to make sure this is buttoned up, clean, it's accessible. It's not, you're not using a dated email address. You don't have maybe, you know, many of us have nicknames. You want to make sure you use your full name. You want to make sure that you have a reliable working phone number. And if in the event that you change phone numbers, but you have a good email address, I would recommend having kind of a constant. So if you've got a solid email address, you change phone numbers just so you can get back to that company you're applying for and they have good contact information. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to call somebody and the number is no longer in service. It doesn't have a voicemail box set up, and that can be very frustrating for an employer, but also it can really hurt your chances because I might not go back just because of how complicated it was to try to get a hold of you. Make sure you have a professional email address. So it can be something your name, for example, like stacyburnett.com is fine. But if your email is like hulagirl257, like maybe have a different one just for applying to workspaces. And then of course your city address, etc. If you do have, a LinkedIn account or something that would help supplement your resume, or you can absolutely link, put your LinkedIn information if that's something that you have, website, anything of that nature. Not necessary, but if you have it, you can go ahead and throw that on there. So the compelling resume summary, this is what I talked a little bit about. It's just really a statement that kind of pulls together this nice, concise way of giving an overview of your experience and your skills. So this is something that is kind of the foreword to your resume. So it goes at the top, no more than 3 to 5 sentences. It's meant to be very, very short. And then it can really highlight your most significant accomplishments, relevant work experience, maybe some specific skill sets that you have to the job. So I do have an example for you right here. This says, detail, this is for maybe somebody who's applying for a production job in manufacturing. So detail-oriented and reliable candidate with basic experience in manufacturing setting and a strong commitment to safety and quality control. Skilled in following detailed instructions and performing repetitive tasks with precision, enthusiastic about applying my skills to support production goals and uphold high standards of product quality. So that's really wordy. You make it sound like you, and you could even probably take out a sentence or two, but that just kind of gives you an example of how to summarize and show you kind of in a nutshell before they get into like the meat and potatoes of your resume. The next step is going to be your work history section, right? So of course, employers want to know what they can gain by hiring you. And that's really looking at, past behavior and experience. So how have you used your skills and your knowledge? How have you made an impact on your previous companies, again, or work teams? Like I realize some of you, depending on where you are in your career, if you're just graduating from school or you're later on, you can still highlight all the wonderful things you have done, however that makes sense to you, right? And then for each job or or a team or volunteer activity that you're a part of. Just give maybe 3 to 5 accomplishments or bullet points examples and try to quantify things. So it's really nice, again, when you have maybe some data, or you can give some real tangible information about what you did. I'm just gonna put a little anecdote out there. So I do some mock interviewing with the local high schools in the area. I've done that for the past few years now, and it's really impressive. I've had everyone from middle schoolers to seniors in high school, and I was so impressed with resumes they were able to put together with just the minimal experience, the limited experience they've had, right? Because you've got to think middle school, high schoolers. Some of them might have babysat, maybe worked at an ice cream shop, you know, maybe they're part of a sports team, but they were able to showcase just using kind of this structure and still highlight what they are and what they could bring to the table, even having limited experience. So it's possible for anyone. I just want to reassure you of that. So a pro tip is when you do have quantifiable, you know, achievements, employers really get a tangible idea of how you contributed to the organization. So it's always great to highlight what you've done and let employers know that, because then that gives them a sense of, wow, they made some really great waves at this company. What can they do for me here? All right, so creating your skill section. So this is great to have, and something that you want to show maybe some technical skills as well as soft skills. So soft skills can be things like communication. You know, if I'm great at teamwork. These are kind of your value system, the way that you work. But then you might have some technical skills that you can list out here as well. So this is really great to highlight, because that, again, will showcase what skill sets, both from a behavioral perspective and a technical perspective, you can bring to the job you're applying for. And when you think about this, think about maybe 8 to 6 of your top strengths, right? What are those things that you do really, really well, and how are they relevant to the job that you're applying for? If you're changing careers or applying for your first job without work experience, focus on transferable skills, right? So like communication, critical thinking, those are pretty general things that are going to apply. Effective listening, right? Those are things that can really apply to various jobs and almost every job that you might have. Listing your education. So again, this is really great to make sure you add your educational credentials. If you didn't attend college, you can display your high school diploma or GED. If you did attend college or graduate school, but you didn't complete that, just go ahead and add the names of the schools and what you studied, right? So that's really, that's also a beneficial thing, because maybe you didn't complete it, but you did take a course in, you know, economics, right? And I'm applying for something in the business realm. So that's going to show me, you might not have finished, but you do have some experience. You did gain some learnings from that. If you haven't graduated yet, but you have an anticipated graduation date, go ahead and add that. If you graduated more than 10 years prior, you don't have to put the graduation year. Just a little note there. So education continued. Sometimes people, I don't really necessarily get hung up on GPA. I'm really looking for experience. I want to say that here, and I can't reinforce that enough. While some, depending on the field of work that you're going into, and some things might require a certain level of education and or a specific certification or licensing, depending on the role, experience is everything, and something that can't really be duplicated. So I don't get so hung up on GPA, but if it's something that you're really proud of and you think might elevate your chances, you can go ahead and throw it on there if it's higher than a 3.5. Otherwise, I wouldn't worry about it. Any relevant coursework. So again, if you haven't graduated or you have recently, and you don't have a lot of work experience, showcase that, because again, those are going to be, you might be able to apply those learnings in your real life work experience. And then maybe any honors, scholarships, and awards, if they were recent. Again, this is kind of your time to shine and sell yourself. So that's something that you could add as well in the education space. So on the other flip side of that is certification. So some jobs like nursing, accounting, teaching, those things, you know, require, again, specific licenses that you might have. So when you're creating your resume, you want to make a certain section for this and call those out separately. You might have professional training certificates. You could put them there as well. Just make sure you're including the title of what it is, name obviously the agency or the schooling or whatever entity that you received that certificate from, the date that you had it, and then if there is an expiration date, if that applies, or in progress, if you are going to be achieving it at a later date, and when that is always helpful. So as much clear information that you can give, and the more specific you can be, the better your resume. Okay, so in your optional sections, I talked a little bit before about volunteerism and showing up in your community and how that can be something that you can include on your resume. I would obviously create a separate section if it doesn't tie in somewhere else. Okay, so that's when you really want to have it as a standalone. Volunteer work, as I mentioned, can really add value to resume because it not only shows your passion for helping others and your volunteerism and community sense outside of work, but it might help you stand out. So sometimes we might have two candidates that are identical, right? They might have the same educational background, the same work experience. What is something they're just, they could both be a great fit for a role, but there might be something, maybe there is some volunteerism or something that one has and one doesn't. So that might be the thing that sets you apart and lands you that interview. So just think about how impactful that could be if you do add something like that. Okay, we talked about it being kind of towards the bottom, unless it weaves in with some relevant work experience. So how you kind of format that, you do the same thing as you would jobs. You could just start the section as volunteer experience and then list your positions and titles. How did you contribute to that, right? So if I was maybe volunteering for Habitat for Humanity and I was, doing the scaffolding or something, or I was a product manager, or I helped organize something, you could, if you had a specific title, go ahead and list that. And then describe obviously your responsibilities or how you showed up in that capacity for that particular role. So that's what I kind of talked about there, that second bullet point. And then, just be selective when you're adding these different sections for your resume because you only have so much space, right? So your resume really should not exceed 2 pages. 1 page is always preferred. Sometimes you do have just so much, depending if you have a long work history or you just have some pertinent things that you feel need to be captured. I think 2 pages is okay, but anything beyond 2, now it becomes a novel, and a lot of HR professionals don't want to read through that, candidly speaking. All right, so proofreading, this is so important, right? Typos, grammatical errors. This can be a deal breaker, and I just found this little stat for about 80% of hiring managers. Now, I think that again might be role dependent. Sometimes for entry-level positions, we know people are maybe just starting out and they just haven't had a lot of experience creating and crafting a resume, and we do give them grace. We take that into account, but depending on what role and what organization, they may not. So my rule of thumb is not only do a check, you've got all these tools, all this technology where you can make sure that you don't have any spelling errors, etc. Always have somebody else look at it. I lean on my team so much, or a trusted friend, when I'm writing something, like, can you take a look at this for me and just make sure I didn't miss something? Because sometimes you're so close to the document or something that you've created that you will actually just read it the way that it's supposed to be written, the right way, but it actually won't translate to that on your document. So I think it's always great to phone a friend if you can to help you out with that. Some formatting tips. So as I just mentioned, keep it short, right? Short and sweet is key. It's also nice because remember, this is just kind of that nice first step to get you in the door. And then you're going to talk a lot about these achievements and things that you've done during the interview. So just keep it nice and tight, unless you have a ton of work experience and you need that extra room. Margins, 1 inches on all sides. I think typically whatever your kind of your word program is set to, I think is generally that. You can just check that out. Use appropriate fonts. I will be honest and say I won't look and say, oh, this person, like, they use Times Roman, like Times New Roman, thumbs up. But if you did it like in Comic Sans or something kind of goofy or something that it's hard to read, that might turn off the HR professional, might not take you as seriously. Of course, font size, you don't want anything too big. And of course, you're going to need the space on your resume. So keeping it between 10 and 12. Font points is great, 14 to 16 for the headers. 1.5 point line spacing. Again, that's just making sure that you've got plenty of space to get things onto hopefully one page if you can. Making sure that you save your resume. So that's really and how your file name matters. I think that's just for ease of on the user end, but also ease for you. And it kind of goes back to that, making sure you're just using a professional, your full name, the correct name, that so people can make sure that they have you in your system correctly. Some kind of just general tips. So look for keywords in the job posting, because again, as you're thinking about highlighting your skill sets, I'm sure so many of you have so many strengths, so many wonderful things that you bring to the table, and you probably want to list them all. But you only have so much space and so much time to do that in, right? So make sure you're highlighting those pertinent things that relate to the job at hand. You can review resume examples for that particular industry, right? So maybe, there might be, and I know I think this is on a couple of slides, but somebody applying for like a graphic design job or a marketing job, their resumes look a little bit different, right? Because they're in that business. So they're snazzy, they're flashy, they're different colors, some people have their pictures on them, and that might work for that industry, but just kind of know your audience and make sure that you are formatting it to that particular space. Only include relevant information. So there, again, you might have some wonderful things that you've done that have nothing to do with the job. Don't need to include those, right? They might come in conversation later during your interview, but really it only needs to be relevant to the job. Use active language. So I kind of gave you a little snippet of some resume action verbs here. So like developed, right? Advised, executed, motivated. So these are just things that you can use, but always use active language when you are creating your resume. You might need some various versions. So depending on what you're applying for, there might be some minor tweaks, because again, you want to showcase certain things for certain roles, and that's okay. I've got, as an HR professional and throughout my career, I've had a different version of my resume based on the role that I'm applying for. Avoid unnecessary personal detail. This is really critical, right? So as I mentioned, and this actually happened when I was doing some interviews for the visual tech center in at BGSU. And I was so surprised by all of these beautiful resumes that, I mean, were colorful and like crazy, and the font was, all different kinds, and it almost looked like an art project, and they had their pictures on them. I'm like, this is a resume? Like, this is this is wild. And again, for that particular major, and they're in marketing, and that was the whole thing. That was kind of the gimmick. But this can really, on the other end, it can unfortunately create some unconscious biases by a hiring manager, right? So if they see what you look like, they know how old you are, this could it could lead to potential discrimination or some unconscious bias where they don't want to hire you because you don't look like them, right? Or because you're a female, if they thought you were a male. So these are things that just try to avoid in terms of putting that down on paper. They're going to find out some things about you after they get you in a seat, but we're trying to, I've actually seen some companies do like blind resumes or blind interviewing, something to that effect, where they actually strip people's names and educational background just to make sure they are eliminating those biases. So just making sure that you only have on your resume what you need to. And then use AI. We're going to talk a little bit about this in just a couple of slides. But use AI in your technology responsibly and in conjunction with human expertise, right? So technology is so wonderful, but it doesn't replace kind of that human capability. And I want to make sure that you guys are using it the right way. So here's some tools and resources. I've used Job Hero. It's really nice. These are really great because it still gives you an opportunity to come up with the content yourself, but this really does a great job of formatting and kind of pulling it all together for you. There's 1,001 out there. Here's just some that I've either known people to use or familiar with. So I believe most of these are free, if not all of them. So some of them might have, like, if you pay, you turn on one more feature, but I don't think it's necessary for what you would need. All right, so getting into the wonderful world of AI and the pros and cons, right? Because again, it's a big, beautiful thing that we should embrace, but we want to embrace it the right way. So some pros about AI, right? It draws from experience. So this tool is super sophisticated. It feeds from people utilizing it, right? So it's creating this large database of just knowledge from all over the world, right? So it becomes stronger the more people, the more data that accumulates and the more people that utilize it. So it has it's almost like Googling something, right? You can find just about anything when you put it into like a chat GPT or something of that effect. It's a great starting point too, right? So it's a great way to gain inspiration. So if you're just having, you have maybe a brain burst, but you're not sure how to articulate something, but you've got it halfway there, you drop it into AI and you're like, oh, that's exactly what I was trying to say, right? Or if you're just kind of feeling overwhelmed, you're not sure where to start, what to create, throw in a couple of keywords or key sentences, and it can help you pull those thoughts together. So that can be really useful. I do use it in my profession sometimes, whether I'm writing maybe like a thank you letter to someone, or how else have I used it? Oh, just putting together proposals, anything of that nature, right? I know what I want to say, but maybe I just can't figure out how to say it. So it's been really great in that regard. But of course, like everything, there's pros and cons to everything, right? It's not perfect. So it sometimes can write, plausible sounding or incorrect or nonsensical answers, or it can be really excessive or overuse specific phrases. So just keep that in mind. That's why it's so important to read over what AI is spitting out and really polish it up, right? Make it sound like you. So it's going to give you some information, but you need to scrub it up and really make it sound like you. Recruiters may be able to notice the AI. So I will be honest, I can tell. I actually was just sharing this with Jonathan earlier today. I had an employee resign from the company, and I knew 1,000% this was an AI crafted email. It was very, it was nice. It was very professionally done, but knowing the individual and how we've communicated in the past, it did not sound like them whatsoever. So definitely, as we're doing resume review, we can usually tell when it's either a person or depending on the word choice they use and how it comes across, we might be on to the fact that they utilized AI. So you just really have to distinguish it. Still, make sure that you are making it sound, it's got that human feel, that human touch to it. There is something that you can use just checking for plagiarism, because you really want to be careful that you're not taking from somebody else and using your own words. So Copyscape, this is actually just a tool I learned about. It's an online tool. I'm pretty sure this is free. You can drop it in there and it will do a quick search for you just to make sure that you're not running into that issue if you did use AI in any capacity when building your resume. So when you're using that tool, make sure you're always customizing what you send before you set it. So it's great as inspiration. Just make sure you're checking it for spelling and grammar errors and any inaccuracies or non-accurate data or information. Make sure you are editing them so it sounds like it's from your point of view, right? You want it to sound like the authentic and genuine you. So it's really important that it has your voice. And then, as I just mentioned, maybe run it through a plagiarism checker just to make sure you're not stealing somebody's ideas before you make your final edits. So some key takeaways: format is key, right? Choose a format that's easy to read, it's legible, it flows. Describe the impact of your contributions. This is your time to shine, to sell yourself. Think about it as your own kind of personal branding, and really making sure you just highlight all the wonderful things you've achieved and done. Include relevant and pertinent information. So again, things that are critical to land you that interview, right? To land you that role. Only things that pertain to that particular job. Leave some mystery for the interview. So this is not while you're telling, kind of giving them a preview of your story and your journey and where you've been. You don't have to put everything out there, right? It's really just highlighting, giving them enough to say, hey, I want to talk to this person. They sound pretty interesting. I think they might work for our company. I want to get them in there and have a conversation, right? But you still want to be able to have that and tell them the in depth, all the wonderful things you've done, what your career journey has been during your interview process. Keep it brief and concise, so just be really clear, be specific. Try to keep it to the 1 page if you can, but 2 pages is okay if you've got that 10 plus years of experience. Use your tools as a guide. So, they're really there to help supplement all the wonderful information and knowledge that you want to create in your resume and your cover letters. So just don't let them do the work entirely for you, right? So use them as a guide. And then this is the first impression to sell yourself. So remember that, and make sure that you're making really good word choices, making sure that you're highlighting those strengths and the skill sets, what you uniquely bring to the table. All right, guys, I think that's all I have for my information. So I would love to entertain any questions that we might have at this time.
Beautiful, beautiful job, Shayna. Thank you so much. I do have a question just for the audience in itself. So, I did drop it in the chat. So how long do you think, or how much information do you think a job seeker should include on their resume? Say, for instance, if they have had several jobs, how many years should one go back? Should they try and list them all 10 years from there, or 4 years is enough? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tamika. So I generally I would say I think the rule of thumb is like no more than 10. I would say even if you've had several in that time period, 5 to 7, that's probably a pretty good range. And also think about longevity. So how long have you been at those? If you had a couple little things in between here and there sprinkled in that might not really hurt or help, then I would lose them. So I think about the longevity of when you've worked somewhere, and then I would say that kind of 5 to 7 year window.
Good deal. And second to that, most often, a person that a job seeker may complete their resume to offer to an employer for consideration, right? But sometimes you may have these specific dates on your resume, but then when the employer interviews you, the dates don't align. Can we talk about how important that is?
Yes, that is very important, right? So make sure you're updating your information, and sometimes it's absolutely okay to. So say you maybe missed that, you got the interview and you didn't clean up your resume because there was a time lag maybe in getting back to you. You can bring an updated copy to that interview, right, or to that employer. If you have an opportunity to send it in before, hey, there's been some changes, make sure you get that to us, and or get it to us during the interview process so we do have the right information. For example, I've had some people that had kind of going, so this kind of goes in tandem with your first question as well, where they worked somewhere for 7 years and they didn't even put it on their resume. I'm like, what? And they'll start talking about it during their interview. I'm like, that's solid information, and that's very pertinent to what you're applying for. So why didn't you put it, right? So then I begin to wonder, why did you leave it off? Was there an issue, right? Why you left that employer? But also, if you have the dates kind of incorrect, that could maybe make you be perceived as wishy-washy, and or anytime there's inaccuracies, you have to think, if you haven't had a chance to have a conversation with me yet and I'm just seeing this, then you might be dismissed before you even have that opportunity. So it's so critical to have that information up front to make sure you can get your foot in the door. You had that chance to have that conversation. A lot of employers are reasonable. We realize everyone's had a past. They've had different issues with employers, and that's not necessarily going to make or break you from getting a role. But what could hinder you is not even being able to afford that conversation because of, a sloppy or inaccurate resume? Good questions. And I think there might be a couple in the chat.
I think that was...
Oh, nope, I see that was you. Okay, fantastic. Yes. I wanted to add one thing about the longevity. So yes, I said kind of the 5 to 7. If you've worked somewhere for like 20 plus years, 10 plus years, 15 plus years, definitely put that on there, right? That shows not that you have to, the other things don't show loyalty. But if you're going out for maybe like computer programming, I'll say, and you've had 15 years of experience in that type of field, I want to see that. That's something you definitely want to highlight. So yeah, definitely the longevity of, or the tenure of where you work somewhere is great information as well.
Before I ask a question, anyone ask a question, don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
Anything. So I wait. So I guess that same talk when you talk about listing past employers, I'm curious if you you were fired from a job, or maybe it just didn't end on a good note, is that something still worth including? And if you do, is there a certain way that you talk about that when you get to like the interview phase, if you do get to it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So and I don't know that I apologize. I don't put anything about reference checks on there. So I want to say I'm going to get into your question, Jonathan. But first, you can, if you'd like to, there are some references that you had that are going to give you, a great recommendation. You can put references available upon request. You do not have to list them. Okay, if we want to request those, we can following the interview. But you can have that in your back pocket ready to go. So I just wanted to note that about references that you might have. Now, in terms of jobs that you might have been fired from, right? And this is a very real thing. It is, especially if it's somewhere that you've worked, say you worked there for maybe a month, or let's even say less than a year. Unless that's the only work experience you have to bring to the table, I would consider not including it if you have other work experience to reflect on. If you do not, or you've worked for a company for 5+ years or something, it's okay to put it. Now, if you recall, or if you notice on my examples, and typically on a resume, you're not going to put you're going to put like the dates that you worked there, right? So it might be 2007 to 2015. You're not going to put like reason for leaving, right? That's going to be something that comes up in the interview process. That's your time then to be candid. Now, it's not going to be a deal breaker, right? Because sometimes people, whether they leave on their own accord or they are terminated, but it was maybe, it could have been for attendance or whatever else, right? Typically, as employers, we're not really, unless it was like a violation of policy, or maybe something like sexual harassment or just things of that nature, right? What we will do is, you typically don't have to disclose that during the interview, just so you guys know. Most employers have pre-employment contingencies. So we're going to do a background check. We're going to do a, maybe a physical and drug screen. We will follow our process, right? So we'll do those things. And then if there's anything that maybe raises our alarm to have a conversation about, that still doesn't necessarily weed you out, right? Because again, we are a second chance employer. There's so many that are, but we do need to know, and we might have a conversation with you about like, okay, let's be truthful. Tell us what happened, just so we can make sure that we're keeping you safe. We're keeping the rest of our employees safe. So that's kind of how that would shake out. But I would go ahead and include it if you have to, because it's the only work experience that you have, or you worked there for a long time and you did a great job for them, but maybe you were laid off, or maybe there's a reasonable explanation as to why you were termed. Good question.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone has any questions? No, everyone's shy. Okay.
I know, quite agree. They're too hot. They're too hot to talk.
I think they're listening and taking notes and learning.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm a processor. I respect it. So I will have all these questions probably the next day after I went to a seminar or a conference. So I completely relate. But I do want to, as I mentioned, I want to make sure you've got my contact information. You're going to get these slides. I am here to help. I can't say that enough. And I hope that all of you found value in this and you get the job of your dreams. And however I can help in the future, don't hesitate to reach out.
We appreciate you, Shayna and John. This is definitely great, valuable information, helping our job seekers, whether youth, young adults, or adults alike, becoming work ready or retaining employment as they continue to move forward in their career endeavors. So we really appreciate the two of you partnering with Pathway to offer this great information. You are appreciated.
Of course.
Opportunity. Well, so if, I guess assuming no one has any questions and we're all just marinating and all that, once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining. Thank you so much, Shayna. Thank you so much, Tamika. Yes, you will get a recording and I'll send you the slides as well for your own use or if you want to share if anyone who was able to join. And then yeah, if you have any questions or anything, I will include Shayna's contact information in there as well as my own too. So if you ever need anything as well. But if that is it, we'll let you all go and stay cool and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.